Start with the chair calling the meeting to order, and then I'll do roll call. So I'll let you officially call it to order.
Okay, I'll call this meeting to order. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for being here for this joint workforce housing and council meeting today. Should be a great meeting. So we'll start with roll call. And Chair Fan,
Here.
Vice Chair John Rocha,
Here.
Randy Goodman,
Here.
Nicole Kennedy,
Here.
Luther Kraxberger,
Here.
and Anthony Teeters is not here, and Arnold Urias is not here. All right, Mayor Good,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Cantelmi,
Present.
Councilmember Gambogi,
Present.
Councilmember Montoya is not here, Councilmember Freeworth,
Here.
Councilmember Moore, and Councilmember Rusing is not here either. All right, and then I'll let Chair take it off.
Okay, thank you very much. Because I'm nervous, I'm going to stand up so I can kind of walk around. So we're here after we've been meeting. Well, let me start by introductions. I think we all know you folks because you're our city leadership, but you may not know all of us. So let's walk around quickly, 30 seconds, to introduce ourselves, how long we've been in town, and maybe what we do. So I'm Mike Fan. Been here since 1958. Graduated Prescott High School, graduated ASU, and CEO and part owner of Fan Contracting.
Yeah, my name's John Rocha. Been here since 2007. Went one of those Riddle kids that just never found a way out of here. Loved it too much, so I stayed. And I'm the owner of Southwest Homes, and we do factory-built housing, developments, and retail. Yep.
Good morning. I'm Nicole Kennedy, Arizona native, and we moved to Prescott in 1989, so I've seen a lot of the changes. I have a 10-year-old son, and I actually married a different Riddle kid who's not in the room today, but I currently am doing business and nonprofit consulting.
Yeah, hi, Randy Goodman, retired from the fire department 30 years, moved here in 14 from Parker, Arizona. Currently developing commercial property, Goodman Builders, and excited to be on this board.
You got it?
Yeah. Luther Kraxberger. I've lived here for 18 years. I have a wife and 3 kids, and they were born and raised here. I was a Riddle student as well, and stuck around. Own Bear Creek Holdings, Axberg Homes, and Prescott Lakes LLC, building and developing.
Okay, thanks. So thank you for spending some time. I know this is not a normal council day, and this eats into your additional time. So thank you very much for being here and listening to what we have to say. The Workforce Housing Committee has been meeting for about a year now. We've gathered lots of information, learned a lot from other people. Connie is our council liaison, so she's been at almost every meeting. So it was time that we shared what we've learned so far, what we've gathered so far, and then solicit input from you folks. Are we going the right direction? Are we not going the right direction? What should we shift? How should we change? What more information can we gather? And then at some future meeting, we'll come back to you and give you our recommendations. But for right now, we're here looking for guidance. So as this meeting goes forward, we would ask you to interrupt us and ask any questions you want, provide your input as we go. At the end of this meeting, that interaction that we'd like to have in an informal setting like today will give us the guidance we need. I guess the history, as you guys know how we got started, that we are a mayor's commission. And we're here to address the needs of this community, and they're significant, we think, throughout the nation. Used to be an issue at Telluride and Aspen and other locations where the communities, their housing costs and the costs within the community just became very difficult just for the average working Joe. Now, throughout the nation, you hear a lot of communities that are grappling with these same issues. How do we house? And let me say one thing right now: we're not looking for housing for the homeless. We're not looking for affordable housing. We're looking for workforce housing. The commission goal is to concentrate on affordability, or at least helping our police, our fire, healthcare, teachers, and our entire working class find housing that is affordable to help their family, so they're not driving an hour to work because the only affordable place they can find is an hour's drive away. Takes away from their family, takes away from their quality of life. From a community standpoint, I think it's twofold. No, number one, I think it's an ethical duty of our community to watch after these people. Selfishly, we need these people. Like we need them for our health care. We need them for our protection. We need them when we go to a restaurant. So the needs are twofold. I will say to the public here, we have decided not to take public comment today. We would ask to, if you have public comment, to bring it to us at our next Workforce Housing Committee. We think this meeting is going to take a little bit of time, and we want the interaction with council. We don't want to bring in new ideas today. Those are for the next Workforce Housing Committee meeting. And I think that kind of sets us up to start going through our findings. So I'm going to turn it over to Member Krexberger. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're just going to go over real quick the Workforce Housing Committee mission, and that is to plan and preserve workforce housing solutions to promote a healthy and vibrant community for all, kind of like what Mike was saying, including everybody on that. The vision of the committee is to facilitate housing solutions to attract and retain quality employees and lead to improve service delivery and quality of life for our residents and the workforce, emphasizing on workforce. Do you guys have any questions on those two slides?
Okay. Definition.
Well, Mike kind of said it all already. But actually, the definition of workforce is there's households of 4 that earn between 60 and 120% of the average median income for our area. So that's the legal, I guess, definition of it. We refer to it as housing, apartment units that's affordable for our essential workers, which is teachers, nurses, policemen, firemen. You already know all that. But I want to put my 2 cents in here, and I feel very strongly that small business drives America, makes communities vibrant. Small business needs small business employees. So they're just as important, maybe not quite as essential, but just as important to make a community run are those workers that work for small business. And so they're just as important to provide housing as the rest. Question?
Mike said we could interrupt, so here I go.
Please do.
How'd you come up with the number 60 to 120?
It's a U.S. consensus. It's a definition that the housing, what help me out here, guys. Housing Authority, Housing Board, I can't remember what it is.
So we actually did a lot of research and looked at both HUD definition and the Urban Land Institute definitions.
That's what it was.
And we compared them against our demographics here in Prescott to come up with the numbers.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike?
Okay, so we're going to jump into goals. So we. You're absolutely right. Sorry about that. Thank you for keeping us on track, keeping me on track.
Thank you. Okay, so kind of piggybacking on what Mike said earlier, I think it's important to also say what this is not. Commonly, the terms affordable housing are used when we're talking about housing and addressing needs. And the HUD definition of workforce housing is defined as housing on which the occupant is paying no more than 30% of their gross income for housing costs, including utilities. So that's what affordability means. Now, there's an affordable housing program, AHP, that you're probably familiar with, which is more of the federally subsidized housing like Section 8, public housing, those kinds of things, which this is not. So again, our definition is workforce housing refers to residential properties such as apartments or homes that are designed to be affordable for individuals and families, different from a direct government subsidized housing program. We do not currently have a housing authority in the city. The goal is to offer housing that is no more than 30% of their annual household gross income, including utilities, prioritizing and coordinating a vetting process to identify those with greater need. This will provide the target monthly workforce housing rent or mortgage amount of about $1,150, not including utilities.
Hey, Mike, can I tag on to it? And let me just say this.
Hang on just a minute. Councilwoman can tell me had a question.
It might be the same thing I was just going to bring up. I just wanted to impress upon the council members that one of the things we thought was very, very important as we go forward into the community is making a big deal out of defining the difference between affordable housing and workforce housing. This is for people that have actual jobs. Because one of the things that other municipalities have dealt with is the NIMBYism, not in my backyard, because they automatically assume it's going to be the Section 8 type housing. This is not that. The other thing is that they brought up is, actually Randy was very right. We're looking at a variety of things. So it's going to be starting with apartments all the way up to single family homes, possibly townhomes, because it's going to be a stepped process of how they achieve that. One of the things that we found is that they can't quite get the down payment. And that's where if they're using most of their money to pay the rent, they don't have the opportunity to save the money for the down payment to get into any of these units. So, thanks.
Okay, Randy?
That was it.
Okay.
Sorry. As a board, we just recognized how important when we address the public to use the word workforce housing, not affordable. It's very easy to mix those words up. And when you say affordable or low income, you get a lot of pushback from the community. This is workforce. And I think she nailed it right on the head. And our hope is that workforce at some point can own and have pride of ownership, not just be renters.
I have a question regarding our workforce. I know you all, initially I didn't make a lot of your meetings, but I made a few enough to know that you were doing some homework with some of the other police, fire, the hospital, and other groups. When their employees, I remember the hospital was sharing some information, their employees were talking about what they felt was within their budget affordable for housing. Does that line up with this 1,150, or is this lower or higher than what they were saying?
I'm going to jump out there and say I think it's actually even a little bit lower than what we've heard from the community. So this is a challenging goal. So if we strive towards that goal, maybe we can capture a large population of the people in need.
Good. That's what I was wondering, if this was the be-all, end-all number, or progress will be celebrated.
And it's funny, the organization. So as I've learned through this process, my mindset was always we need to provide for these people, or help provide and work towards that goal. As what we've learned through this process is there are other avenues and other organizations out there that can provide down payment assistance and can provide low income loans and other things. So as you will see as we move forward in this discussion, there's two sides to look at it, both from an assistance on the supply side and then assistance on the payment side.
And I just want to quickly offer, Lois, that the largest need we have in this community is our hospital. And that's no surprise to me when you think about what makes up our population here right now, largely retired people. We heard from Penny, actually, I think came up and told us that right now they could use 1,200 units. So that has been the largest need for us here. And again, it's all different. Obviously, a doctor makes more than somebody, working in a restaurant. So it's variable. It's all over the board.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, let's start walking into the meat of this discussion and start with our goals. We've identified some goals we would like to pursue, subject to the council's concurrence. And I'll start with goals number 1 and 2, and then I'll hand the mic off again. Goal number 1 is we feel that this position deserves a specific staff member to work with the council and with the committee in many areas of need, working with developers, identifying locations where and partnerships that we can provide some workforce housing, working with lenders, working with the Northern Arizona Housing Authorities, Housing Solutions, thank you. There are writing grants. There's money available out there, so somebody that can help us write grants. There's just a ton of work to do. We believe it's more work than a part-time person could or should do. It's an important enough issue, and we just feel it should be a designated person or a consultant hired. The second goal is how do we, or the other half of that same goal is how do we finance that? And I will tell you, I think there are, including, and I'll just jump out there and say it, including myself, that I think there's private money out there that can work with the city of Prescott. And if we come up with some joint sharing of funding, I think it's something that we can put together. I don't think it should all be on the private side, and frankly, I don't think it should all be on the public side. But I think there's a public-private partnership that should occur that can achieve the goals that we've put together. We've also felt that formalizing, in addition to this committee, formalizing a stakeholder group that can really provide the information, the data, the expertise, and potentially on the private side, the funding that is needed to facilitate this and really provide us the direction we need and are the ultimate recipients of the work that we do. The low-hanging fruit would be Dignity Health, would be Yavapai College, would be the city of Prescott, would be Yavapai County. There are various groups that are really in need of help, and they would form the stakeholders group to also provide guidance. So if there's no questions regarding that or comments regarding that, I'll hand it off to.
Hold on.
Mike, let me make a comment.
Good.
When I first thought this was a laudable effort to be able to create workforce housing options for our working community, quite frankly, I have to pat John Rocha on the back because when I became aware of some of his manufactured housing developments, looking at the current technology and the quality of manufactured homes has advanced so dramatically over the last couple of decades that a lot of people can't even tell the difference between a quality manufactured home and a site-built home. But being able to do that can reduce the cost of those equivalent square footage houses by maybe over $100,000. That's substantial. And we also have zoning regulations that sometimes restrict the ability to put a manufactured home in a typical site-built neighborhood. But with the quality improvements, I think most people would not object to that. They might not even be aware of it because the quality is so much better. But talking to our small business community, clearly the biggest challenge for them is being able to find a reliable, consistent workforce within their small businesses, being able to attract and retain workers so that they can thrive and expand their businesses is a huge challenge. And clearly, if there are other areas in the community where affordable workforce housing options are available, those workers can live there and work there. Why do they want to have to commute into Prescott for essentially the same job? They will probably want to stay closer to where they live. So I think that's a big challenge for us to be able to come up with some solutions here. Now, geez, I think I've owned about 7 or 8 different homes over the course of my professional career, and I've never owned one where I only had to spend 30% of my income. I always put in a lot of sweat equity. I'd buy the worst house in the nicest neighborhood and then work every weekend to try to fix it up and bring it up to standard and then flip it and take that equity and move on. So I have a lot of firsthand experience knowing how to build that type of equity. And there's a lot of people that may not have the basic DIY skills to do something similar. But when we look at some of these benchmark criteria that either comes from HUD or these other places, then at least that allows us to have a standard by which to focus on, because we may be able to attract some additional funding sources if we use that as a kind of a benchmark standard. So I don't think it's too likely that we're actually going to be able to achieve that, but it's a place to be able to have some connection with some of these broader funding sources. So I think that's why it's important. This is not going to be a quick fix by any means. Supporting Mike Phan's statement that this is going to take some long-term development to come up with solutions. I mean, I'm going to be doing the State of the City address tomorrow, and one of the components of that is the fact that we have over 1,500 rental units now in various stages of development throughout the city. So I know there's been the common concern of supply and demand, and we're starting to see that supply respond to the high demand within the city. But it's a lot of that because there's so much demand, the quality of those rental units is so high that the lease costs and the rental costs are high to go along with it. So some of the more affordable options now are starting to show up. We've got a couple of small 12 and 15 unit developments over on Valley and Sunset. So those are usually lower cost. So we'll see some of this softening, but being able to bring the net cost down so that workers can afford to locate and then work locally is going to take some real creative thought. So I think with the members of this committee and their background and experience, we're going to come up with some pretty good ideas. I think the teacherage over on Taylor Hicks is an example of having numerous stakeholders work together to be able to come up with some pretty darn nice homes over there to be able to utilize. That can't be done anywhere, and I'm not sure if we can scale that up. But it does show that it's a possibility that when there's a commitment to the stakeholders working together, we can produce some pretty darn quality living spaces. There you
Great.
go.
Thank you.
Mike,
The input. Ted?
furthering the mayor's comment, our fire chief Holger Dory once said that Prescott is a town of 47,000 at night and 100,000 during the day. And my good friend Vinny Gallegos is tired of me quoting Stephen Covey, but the idea is you begin with the end in mind. And I think there's a lot to be gained by integrating some of the thinking here. You know, we've had, whatever you call it, popcorn rabbits, workforce housing or affordable housing. We've had that in the general plans for 24 years now. And as a member of the Planning Commission, and Tom Riley can attest, just about every time someone comes forward with something that resembles workforce housing, everybody's heads blow off. And I remind them that in the previous year or 2 years, that they voted for this when they approved the general plan. So I think having people stay here means we have less traffic, which improves the situation, and I think there's a room for integration there, and I would just suggest that to you.
Okay.
Oh, and now for a possibly dumb question. I always listen to Patrick Kirkendall talk about the VA, and he does a lot for the VA. And I wonder if those VA workers are some of the workers that might appear or appeal to this program. And I wonder if that's another place where you might get some integration.
Yep. Great thought. Yes.
I wanted to go back real quick when you were talking about under your short-term goals, number 1, match funding for a full-time workforce housing facilitator. I heard a sigh coming out of the audience. So I just want to bring up that I don't want to steal anybody's thunder here, but we do have the potential right now of a grant. And we've applied for that. I don't know what the status of it is that may be able to cover some of that. Do you want to speak to that? So hopefully we can get that partially paid for.
So we'll actually be bringing that to you next Tuesday at council. We have to ask for your approval to apply for the grant. So we'll bring quite a bit more information on that, but it is $200,000 that could go to some different aspects of this as well. So more to come.
I say yes.
Okay, anything further on those?
You know, the only thing I was thinking about when you said formalized third-party stakeholder organization, and it wasn't written down, but when you said it, Mike, I went, yeah, there it is. City of Prescott. I think, and I had the opportunity, Ted and I were driving around town with Joe Baines looking at things, and it was suddenly like, oh, we own land over there. Somebody left it to us. And we own land over there. Somebody left it to us. And these were in areas that I would consider residential, but big parcels of land. And so we have a problem. Police, fire, we have the same problem that all the other businesses is. And I'm thinking, why can't the city, you know, maybe not just normal policymakers, but even like our real estate experts or others be part of this stakeholder group to come up with some skin in the game solutions that we put in as well, beyond just head count.
Yeah, and we've investigated that. We're at the elementary stages of that.
Good.
Very good point. John?
Yeah, actually, let me grab this. So I'd probably just to write notes if I have to. All righty. So we're moving on to goals, short-term goals, general plan housing element and draft. So this committee was informed that currently the city of Prescott has formed a general plan committee, and we are going through that entire process as a city to implement or adopt a new general plan, I believe. We have gone back and forth on editing, and essentially this committee is just wanting to sink some teeth into that general plan. Now, granted, most of the meetings is us getting very excited and very detailed with a lot of the things we want to see. And then staff helps us bring us back a little bit and tell us this is a general plan, keyword general. But I think it's important. I think it's important for this committee to really sink some actionable items and, I keep saying sink some teeth into that general plan to help guide potential businesses that want to come into town, developers that want to come, builders that want to come and look at the city of Prescott, and give them some sense of what this problem looks like, and paint a picture of what it can be with their participation in some way. One thing we've talked about in the meetings is that I don't know that many people that just like to pick up like a 40-page general plan and have a good time reading it at night. But it is a very important document, and I know staff, I know city leadership has made it clear to us that it is a very it's a guiding document really for a lot of things that happen here at the city. So this committee has been going back and forth on coming up with a language and breathing in some of these concerns as a community around workforce housing and the lack of into this general plan. I believe we're trying to wrap it up in this month, I believe, is our official recommendation to the general plan committee. Right, Chelsea? Give me a little soft nod here. Okay, great. So that's what we've been working on, is essentially the language that we're going to include there, given all of the work that we're doing around workforce housing. Any questions?
Yeah, I got a couple comments for you.
Yeah, sure.
I could keep you all day quoting chapter and verse of initiatives that have come before the Planning Commission that were in the general plan that got turned down. And I think Ralph Hess is here. He did a yeoman's job to try to put more teeth in the general plan because it's not legally binding. And my concern, and I've said this in just about every public venue, is the residents may not be reading the general plan to make a vote, but developers are reading the general plan to see opportunities. And when the general plan says this is an opportunity and a developer makes a proposal, the same residents in the room that voted for the general plan are now in the room demonstrating against the proposal. If we can't make it legally binding, and we can't, I think we can do a much better job of communicating the right story so people can comprehend it, rather than saying, "Oh, I don't want workforce housing in my neighborhood." I think there's a better way we can do it.
Yeah, and I could speak to that, Councilman Gambogi, too, about as far as. So you've hit two really important things that we're already addressing as a committee, which is exciting to hear. But the general plan, obviously, again, we're keeping general, right? The fact that we have the opportunity as a committee, I think, to breathe in some language as to our concerns as a community and the work that this committee is doing, I think is a win, right? I mean, we all had to come to we had to be okay with that, right? What we haven't discussed yet, and I'm sure we'll get into it down, I think 9-10 goal or something like that, is the housing policy, the workforce housing policy, which is really the meat of everything that we will work on to put together our, granted, we still need your feedback as council for the city, but that policy is going to be the sinking teeth, essentially, of making something now not as a guide or non-binding, but something that's a policy from the city. So we're very excited for that, because that is the conundrum. Those general plans get voted on by citizens, and there's, developments come up. They adhere to the general plan, but there's, a lot of it also is education. That's one thing we're going to hit on as a committee here. Down the list here is we are very serious about having a community outreach and education portion of the work that we do, to make sure that we can all come to understand the problem and how we can solve it and support each other in doing so. Number 4, create 2 separate incentive packets. So I think the idea here is essentially just creating some sort of a educational piece on, task 1, number 1, we're going to want to meet with developers, builders, other stakeholders, and entities who can help us solve these housing issues. And then essentially just grasp how, on the practical side, and hearing all the voices at the table, this can make sense in an actual physical project. I think that's the goal there. The incentive packet essentially is, again, yes, the general plan, yes, the housing policy that we're going to hopefully recommend here to the council for review. But the incentive packet is just simply that. We want to stimulate workforce housing developments in the city. And that's what the bulk of this work, of the work that we're doing here is. Sorry.
Question, because when I was doing the pre-reading, I was interested in why you just used the word incentive. Maybe it's also education and incentive. I don't know, but I just worry that if people in the community think this is just going to be about incentives, we may not get the broader community support that we want, or there'll be some pushback.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's fair. That's a matter of literally using a different term for it, but we agree. There's nothing particular about it being incentivized as much as it is an educational piece for these stakeholders. So thank you. Yeah.
Another example in this case comes to mind. It's a small detail, but I just wanted to share it with you. Some time ago, a developer came that develops tiny homes. You get a house, you get a garage. And it was between the Rollie Simmons Center and the new site for the Greek Orthodox Church. It's on Rosser Road. And Rosser Road was zoned SF35. There's nobody going to, that's like a $3-4 million house, and no one's going to build a $4 million house on Rosser Road. I liked the proposal. Of course, everybody's heads blew off when they made the proposal. But one thing I thought could be an improvement, and I just pass it along to you when you talk to developers. If there's a development like that, and that was for rental, so you'd rent the tiny home. But if there's some way that you guys could conjure up some way for a lease, purchase, help with down payment, that might change the perception of that development.
Got it. It's a great idea. Thank you.
And then,
Yeah,
can
go
I
ahead.
also mention something too? Just to clarify, I think, Councilwoman Fruworth, I think what you're probably missing in this, so it says basically meet with developers, builders, and other entities to understand best practices and incentives. One of the things that we discovered with the workforce housing is the affordable part of workforce housing. How do we make it affordable? And so there is a program for builders that do workforce housing and how they save money or how they make a profit and also provide a product. It's through incentivizing, but that it's not just with the city or the state. There's government monies, there's tax incentives, there's zoning changes that we can offer. There's things that we can do to incentivize them to come in, but it's a whole line of things. So we were talking about possibly coming up with a pamphlet, because we have a lot of builders in this community, I think, that would step into that realm if they understood it. So basically defining it and having something to, tangible to give them, to show them and teach them how to do that, I think it's going to help us all.
Yeah, no, Connie, I understood, and I know those programs are out there because I actually campaigned on this as a platform that I would support what this group is doing, and I was surprised at the amount of community questions and pushback that came. And, I was like, we had affordable housing for 25 years and we haven't done a thing. If we can't do it for our police and fire, who are we going to do it for, honestly? And I was just very surprised at the amount of pushback coming back. So it's not that I'm against what you're working on. It's how do you thread the needle that you keep the whole community with us as we take the journey together? And so it's just wording matters so just education.
You're absolutely right. The marketing of it, the education of it. Again, if you own a $500,000 house, you're not going to want to have welcoming in Section 8, because that's the part we have to go out now and start to explain to people that is not what we're talking about. And they all have a great plan to be able to do that.
Yep.
So thanks.
Thanks, Connie. So just finishing up on number 4 here, objective 2 would be to help the workforce know what options, i.e. financial programs, housing programs, et cetera. Again, these are very generalized, and I want to reiterate this too. We're just coming to the council for, sorry, Mike. Sorry about throwing your. We're just coming to the council with these generalized ideas. Now, granted, we're very anxious to get into the weeds and start hammering out details, but this essentially these 2 we'll call it educational packets, will be some physical form of a pamphlet, would probably coupled with the community outreach of what we're doing to make sure that folks are aware of what's available for them. Number 5, research the best financial program solutions for the city and stakeholders. This is a loaded one, but just to piggyback off of what Mike said, and I'll read the objective here actually. Investigate financial programs, including but not limited to down payment assistance, mortgage assistance, rental assistance, and rent-to-own options, which is one thing we just heard here a couple of moments ago. And it's a loaded task for sure, but we feel that with the recommendation from this committee for a staff or full-time person and resources that we have been made aware of, like Northern Housing Solutions, I think there's enough funding that is out there. It just takes the effort and the time and the ability to go and track it down and do what we need to do it. Any questions on that?
I think Amy Bondi just had 5 new police officers trained to the tune of $100,000 each. And going back to my homily about synergy, I think when we're talking about first responders, fire, police, teachers, healthcare workers, the more they're engaged in the community of Prescott, Arizona, the more likely they are to stay, and we don't have to hire and train new people. So I would wholeheartedly endorse talking to Holger and Amy about what would it take to keep police people here, because if you can get them in housing and they're invested, then not only is this a better deal, but it's a better deal for the fire department, it's a better deal for the police department, better deal for teachers, and it's a better deal for Prescott.
Thank you. Any other questions on that before we move over to number 6? Yeah, and I think it's probably important for this committee, real quick, just for the financial piece. I think we've all had the consensus that it's going to be needed. We have to figure out a financial piece for our workforce here in this community, because it's not just going to be solved with physical structures. I think there has to be some. I think we've even been explored, talking with community stakeholders like the hospital and police department of, is there employee housing assistance programs that we can help you develop in-house. And so we're exploring those different aspects, but it's important to know that this will be a piece that we feel very strongly will be needed to get the job done. Number 6, accessory dwelling units, the ADU code revision. This is work with planning staff to propose code modifications that encourages and incentivizes ADU construction to increase supply for long-term rentals that can serve as workforce housing. So this stemmed from essentially seeing so many accessory dwelling units, and these are known as granny flats or detached guest homes. And there seems like there's a large opportunity in multifamily type areas within the city where, say, a relative like a grandmother can own a lot in a home in Prescott, multifamily zoned, and they bring in a factory-built ADU that could be built in 4 to 5 weeks and set up in a couple months. And the idea being that relative, that grandmother, could now essentially offer a housing unit for workforce housing. So, of course, the enforcement piece of this is very important. We have to get into the weeds and for details, but the goal is essentially giving it enough definition, giving it enough structure and some teeth into it that we can, slowly, it's not the catch-all solution. It's not going to be in the thousands of units, but it is a step in the right direction, we think, is to revisit that language in the code for the city and see what we can do there. Any questions, concerns? Yeah.
I I think this is a brilliant solution, and yet it terrifies me on the other side. And so the terrifying me is more short-term rentals. I don't want to turn into Sedona. What terrifies me is more diversion housing or those kind of things. So you said the word that I wanted to hear you say. You said definition and enforcement. That's my biggest fear as we go down this, but I do think it's a brilliant opening of solutions.
Yeah, and to segue on that, that's our discussion also. It's a slippery slope.
Yep.
So how it's written, how it's enforced is going to be critical to use it as one of the tools we have to address workforce housing. Amber?
And let me comment also that we've seen a growing propensity for the state legislature to step in and take over local control of different aspects that we might want to incorporate in our city. So this might actually be necessary to include in our city charter so that we have charter protection when the legislature decides to step in and try to make some broad-based statewide policy enactments. Joe, what do you think about that?
Joe, the mic. And I'll make a quick comment. Chelsea, correct me if I'm wrong, but right now, per the code, short-term rentals are already allowed in ADUs. So by adjusting it, we'll be able to actually open it up to hopefully more long-term. If we can find a way to incentivize it, that'll actually hopefully reduce the amount that are used for short-term rental.
And I was just going to say that as it relates to short-term rentals, this is an area of the law kind of taken up by the state. So when we talk about enforcement, the city's really limited on enforcement on short-term rentals because of the way that the legislature have wrote it. And I've heard that there's 3 bills being proposed that may change how this works. And to the question about the charter, it's an interesting one and may be the way to handle it, but a charter provision is trumped by the state law if the state law is deemed an area of statewide concern. So that it would really take some analysis on whether short-term rentals, as the way the state has governed them, is an area of statewide concern or not. So there's a lot of kind of open questions as it relates to short-term rental.
Take the thing off. It's fallen over.
Just a question, therefore, Mayor, with what you just brought up. Should we, as a city, or as individual elected officials, be signing on to some of these efforts to give back local control of short-term rentals to set ourselves up for this?
Well, I know I've talked to a number of state level groups and constantly try to say, you're worried about the federal government stepping in and taking over state control of policies, but then you turn around and take away local control because of your efforts at the state legislature. So there's got to be some respect for local control at the legislature and not have the consequences like we've had with the vacation rentals that sounded like a good idea at the time, but it had some dramatically negative local consequences. So that's something I think we have to continue to work with our representatives to make sure that local control is respected, and it gives us the opportunity to enact some of these quality proposals and then be able to establish codes and be able to enforce those codes locally for the best interests of our community.
One of the things I wanted to point out, though, that we've been discussing, Lois, is I'm going to call this a grant assurance. So if we allow a stakeholder, and I'm going to use a hospital again because they're the greatest need, okay, Penny? If the stakeholder decides to structure it, and again, this has got to be legally structured, and they build these things and we don't have a rent control, they can then, as a private owner, impose that themselves. The same thing goes, and we've talked about with the ADUs. If they take advantage of a program, there will be and again, a grant assurance or an assurance that they will use this for a particular use only. Now, it'll have to run its course because, again, we all have private property rights. But if you take money in any way or you're incentivized to be able to do these, you will have an assurance that you're going to have to be able to follow through with. I don't think we can hold it in forever. I read somewhere where we can do it for 10 years, I think, or something where we can impose that if you take that money, you need to keep this ADU or whatever it is as an affordable or workforce housing component to add to the inventory. But again, it's a slippery slope because we can't do it forever. Again, it's private property rights, but it's, we're talking about all different kinds of things. That's why I think the stakeholder, if they're involved in this, they can do what they want with their property. If they decide to rent control it, that's up to them. So if it's a government type run thing, I think it's going to get very confusing. Thank you.
All right. So if there's nothing further with number 6, we're moving on to number 7. Number 7, create a workforce housing policy for council consideration. The objectives here, we have 3 of them. Research ways to prioritize workforce housing projects within current city policies, i.e. water management policy, as well as in current city codes, building and wildland urban interface codes, for example. Objective 2, research voluntary contributions from new commercial and other development projects, and we should probably include residential development projects, i.e. housing projects include percentage of workforce housing, hotels include housing options for employees or other contributions. And objective 3, revitalization incentive policy. So essentially, I mean, this is a loaded one, but this is where the meat and the potatoes are going to be for all the work that we're doing here, with the idea of being, we have development projects that come, we have, water, which is a big topic of discussion when we're seeing these housing projects. And so for us as a committee, we can go as far with confidence to say at this point that we're going to have to revisit those types of resources that the city can offer to guide and incentivize more workforce housing projects. Again, it's very general, but I think this is going to be the bulk of our work and what we recommend to council at some point. Input, questions?
I thought I'd pause for a second. In your considerations, do you go beyond new construction?
You want to answer that?
I'd say we have talked about it, and some of the discussions, for instance, downtown, and a lot of those second floor units downtown that are sitting vacant, and what can be done from a code standpoint that will help incentivize the people, and from someone that lives downtown, a working, living downtown makes for a vibrant downtown.
Bingo. Thank you.
Slightly off the topic, in the Historic Preservation Department right now, Kaylee Nunez has been working with the State Historic for the adaptive reuse. The adaptive reuse subject has become kind of a hot topic throughout the country right now, especially in older communities. So we are looking at, some of the codes, especially with some of these historic buildings downtown that are sitting there empty, trying to figure out a way to be able to do that. We do have somebody right now on Cortez that has been dealing with Kaylee and their project, and I think he's got 2 maybe going on. So you're right. It's and there are, but believe it or not, there's actually money and grants available to promote that. So it's become, as I said, it's a big thing in California right now. It's a big thing in Washington and a couple other areas that have aging infrastructure areas, older areas. So hopefully Kaylee can figure out a way to bridge that gap and, provide, again, the information for some of these people that are purchasing these older buildings to get a little bit of help in revitalizing them all for this use. Thanks.
Oh, this is a loaded one. So any other questions, concerns, anything on here? Okay. Number 8, create a city program similar to the Yavapai County Home of My Own program. The first objective, meet with building division on feasibility of what this program will look like. objective 2, research cost benefit to initiating the program. And all I could say to this is that, and granted, I apologize, I think committee member Urias was going to do these goals, but I do remember a little bit about the Yavapai County Home of My Own program essentially streamlines. I think that Yavapai County has like 3 to 5 maybe home plans that are essentially pre-approved to be able to allow a builder to come in, pick one of those plans and go build it and streamline that permit review process, reduce maybe, I think, even permit fees in an effort to, again, incentivize the private builder development community to utilize that program for more housing units. And so that's something that this committee has been made aware of, and we're going to hash out kind of what that might look like for the city. Any questions there? Am I still going? Oh, no. Thank goodness. I'm going to hand it over now to committee member Kennedy here for 9 and 10.
Thank you, John. Well, it sounds like, based on Mayor and Council's comments already, that you're keenly aware of the need to educate the community. And we know that there are fears out there and concerns that we need to address. And so I'm actually curious if I could ask you all a question. Do you have concerns about workforce housing being built in your own neighborhood? Personally.
I do.
So I think that leads to the need, right? We need, if we have concerns ourselves, we need to certainly be able to link, arms with the community and educate and define what it is we're trying to achieve. So a while back, I actually sent a report to our committee, and I'm happy to email it to the council if that would be appropriate, just as some reading, or maybe Amber, could I send it to you?
Yeah, no
Okay.
problem. I'll send it out.
Okay. But I'll just summarize what I sent to our committee a while back, which this report was written by the Center for Housing Policy, which is the research affiliate of the National Housing Conference. According to their website, in partnership with the NHC and its members, the center works to broaden understanding of the nation's housing challenges and to examine the impact of policies and programs developed to address these needs. Combining research and practical real-world experience, the center helps to develop effective policy solutions at the national, state, and local levels that increase the availability of housing. So the report is called "Don't Put It Here," and it really talks about the problems with NIMBYism, right? And so they compiled decades worth of research. So this was researchers both within civic groups and also academics published in peer-reviewed articles. And so based on all this decades worth of data, they found that the vast majority of studies indicate that affordable housing, I know that word is, does not decrease neighboring property values and may actually raise them in some cases. So what the findings actually showed was that the quality of the housing was far more important. So it's really about the design, the management, how the housing is maintained in perpetuity, more so than what it's classified in as. So in other words, putting in higher density housing next to lower density housing did not negatively impact values so long as these other items were addressed. So we know that there's a lot that needs to be done to educate. And so we have, as one of our goals, to create a communications plan. I want to thank Mr. John Heine, who's been really helpful to us in putting a lot of this together. And so in your packet, you'll see that there is a community outreach plan. The first part of the plan is really about the fact sheet. So explaining what is the mission and the vision of this committee, why do we need, workforce housing in the city of Prescott, and then also going over what our short and our long-term goals are that we're sharing with you right now. And so I want to share some of those key talking points. There's a lot in there that I won't read all of it because we don't want to take that much time, but some of the highlights. I think we can acknowledge that it promotes economic growth. That's one of the key benefits. So a stable, well-housed workforce is vital for economic development. When workers have affordable housing options, they are more likely to remain in the area, reducing turnover costs for employers. This also creates more income for the employee, not having to commute as far of a distance, and they tend to spend more in their own community, which we all love, right? It encourages civic participation. When people live closer to their workplace, they're more likely to be engaged in local activities and events, fostering a sense of belonging and encouraging a more engaged and active community. Maintaining property values. A well-maintained, thoughtfully designed workforce housing can actually have a positive impact on property values. Studies have shown that when affordable housing developments are properly integrated into the neighborhood, they do not necessarily lead to a decrease in surrounding values. The mitigation of traffic and environmental impact. When workers live close to the workplace, they're not adding to the traffic congestion that we already are dealing with, which is a huge win. So in summary, all this content, which again, I encourage you to read through all of it. Workforce housing is not only a social imperative, but also an economic and community building asset. When thoughtfully planned and integrated into a community, it can enhance the quality of life for all residents without negatively affecting values. It contributes to a more inclusive, economically vibrant, and sustainable community for everyone involved. Going back to the actual outreach plan, so besides the talking points, some of the ways that we would be integrating this information to the community would include press releases, social media posts like Facebook and Instagram with the city's current account, letters to the editor from our chair, Mr. Fan, radio PSAs for specific timely projects and events that are going on that relate to workforce housing. And then I think probably one of the most important of all is the ambassador work that's involved, which is really all of us, hopefully all of you, being those people out in community that can really speak to these issues and educate and inform our neighbors. Any questions or comments on that particular goal?
Yes, ma'am. I think all the information, evidence you came up with, I think everybody agrees with that. The question is, how do you make it happen? I wish you were at planning meetings where it turned into riots. I'll use the word riots. That's why I think, you know, if you, when Covey says begin with the end in mind is not just the moral argument of workforce housing. It's being fair to developers. If you're going to suggest you rezone this from this, that you stand by that and zone it that way. It's also being fair to residents who bought big-time expensive homes and don't want affordable housing. That's why I think if you have a multi-faceted approach, new plus revitalize old, because you're not going to get an argument in revitalizing old, because it's already there. The only argument's going to come is trying to put some affordable housing in an area where they got expensive homes. And we've really not had a good track record. From what I understand, Saddlewood was supposed to be, quote, affordable. Chelsea's predecessor, Bryn, told me they opened up at $250. And when I was walking up there campaigning, because it's the only flat place in Prescott, and I got tired of playing goat up and down hills, 2 houses were for sale. Now that's 1,700 square feet, no front door, 35-foot fronts, and one house was $480, and the other house was selling for $540. That's not affordable. So there's many ways to skin the cat, and I wholeheartedly endorse taking a multifaceted approach and go where you can do it easily without a lot of arguments.
We agree, Councilman Gambogi. We've definitely talked about the need for multiple answers to this problem because it really is, it's a local crisis in our community, and it's going to take a number of solutions to make it happen.
Yeah, and I'll add, I think there's clearly a perception problem. As soon as you use the phrase affordable housing, people cringe and think either it's going to be a trailer park or manufactured homes, same kind of reaction. And I think it's important that we have a consistent message and talk about workforce housing, not affordable housing. Because I think everybody wants to be able to have quality services, good retail options, hospitality, dining options, et cetera, and all those need a consistent workforce. So if we can't find places for those people to live, then we're not going to have that, those amenities that people expect. But we have to be able to clarify what their initial reactions are to some of these descriptions. I mean, I think throughout the state, water resource management is a very high priority. We heard in the governor's State of the State address that she really wants to be able to have some broad, especially in the rural areas, water resource management. And if she can't get some legislation out of the legislature, she intends to move forward on her own. So I think it's important that we can communicate not only the quality of manufactured homes, but be able to identify that their use of water in those multifamily developments is much, much less than single-family homes. I mean, we still have codes requiring landscaping, and I think we can modify those to have less landscape requirements, more xeriscaping, so there's less water being provided for irrigation. And I think making sure that multifamily have some incentive for sub-metering rather than master meters. It would be great if you could have some affordable way of putting meters in individual apartments so the people who live there will realize, gee, I think I left the faucet on. Oh, well, I'll turn it off when I get back from work, because it doesn't cost them anything. So if you have the right kind of incentives, multifamily, higher density is way better for our water resource management in the long run. So there's a lot of things that can be done to communicate to the community at large and the current single-family homeowners the benefits of this type of housing development. I know 4 years ago or so, when we decided to have that community cleanup in the Dexter neighborhood, and we got all the sofas off of the front yards and different things like that. And there really was a substantial visual improvement in those neighborhoods. And then shortly thereafter, we started seeing some small apartment development in the 10, 12, 14 unit area. And none of those places had hot tubs or lap pools or anything else. So the cost for each one of those rental units was substantially lower. And that's the kind of thing that I think is, if we create more incentives for that, I think I'd rather have 20 of those 15-unit developments than one 300-unit development. It fits into the neighborhood better, it's less objectionable, and it's more compatible with the surrounding areas. So I think it really comes down to communication and consistent communication with good reasoning behind it.
You know, one of the things, Mayor, we've talked about too, just briefly, is the potential of creating an overlay, identifying. And I can foresee a time where this committee would be very good at bringing in, as the developers start to come in, if they knew ahead of time which properties that this committee has identified that would be a good pick for this sort of housing, I think it would dispel a lot of problems with the neighborhoods. It would really help clarify to the developers. I mean, if you know where you're going, that shaves a year off of your project. If you've got to spend 6 to 8 months trying to identify and fight with community development and the neighborhood, why not just get a grip on it and move forward and identify for the developers the areas that would be acceptable for whatever they wanted to bring forward. Then I just wanted to quickly comment on what you mentioned here with the Dexter neighborhood. That's where code enforcement comes in. I've seen it myself for years in many, many neighborhoods. Once those neighborhoods are cleaned up, as you said, not only do the property values go up, but it entices other people to come in and start putting their money in those neighborhoods as well. It's a win-win situation. It's all about code enforcement, and that code enforcement is the promise that the city makes to the people that own those homes, and that goes into those neighborhoods. So we've talked about strengthening that, and I think we're working towards that. So, but just a byline, you're right. That's how we need to be able to take care of those neighborhoods. But getting a grip on that and getting ahead of it and looking, I mean, Prescott's not that big if you think about it. We know where our borders are. We can sit down with a map and figure out suitable areas, whether it's privately held property or property that the city holds, to be able to, give them a leg up. These are the areas we'd like to see you go into. This is the zoning there. This is what we think will fit there. And I think it's going to help make this thing go a little faster. Thanks.
Just one other thought, because of the amount of visual learners we have in the community. Maybe as you develop this communication package, also have like photos, this, not that. This, not that. So that people don't have to go on field trips to get educated. You can actually see a presentation and get behind the vision.
That's great. Yeah, we actually have a little bit of content in our suggested content for the general plan, which illustrates some of the developments that already exist in Prescott, which was eye-opening for me personally. We already have quite a few. Okay, any other questions on number 9? Okay, so number 10, our goal is to set up a fund account for workforce housing. So similar to what the city has done previously, for a change for the better, we would like to make a recommendation that council directs staff to create such an account to really help fund some of these initiatives, whether it's for staffing, research, executing plans, even just toward an actual project. We would love to see a broad account to support these goals. And then we could also, become fundraisers as well as ambassadors. And then objective 2 is to explore ways to seek out additional funding, such as donations. So, any questions or comments?
Randy,
I'm on
you're
deck,
up. You're on deck.
Well, you guys have heard a lot about the short-term goals, a 3 to 5 year range for that. We thought it was important that we include some long-term goals as well. I think one of the things that's important about long-term goals is to go back and look at short-term and see how you did. Have you accomplished them? Have you completed them? Do you need to continue them? So in the long term, we're going to try to identify some partners that we can work with on this. There's a lot of experts out there that already build workforce housing. We have yet to hear from many of them. When I'm talking about private developers, they know the product, they know what they can build, they know what it costs. So we need to identify those partners and then come up with a product that you approve that we allow to be built in the city. So it'll be partners and product, and incorporate into that the stakeholders into this. They need to have their voice heard. What do we need for our employees? Does the product look like what our employees need? Does the product work for our city? Does it upset people because we built this product? That kind of a thing. So we need to identify all that in the long term. The other thing, this isn't our problem. This is a countrywide problem. It's not Prescott, it's not Phoenix, it's everywhere, right? So there's a lot of regional partners out there that we can partner up with. We don't have all the good ideas. Other people have them too. And I think that's what, when we were referring to the grant position, that point of contact person can really be beneficial in this area. They can liaison with other areas, other partners, information. We can look at it, we can give them ours, we can share, and maybe come up with a nice general plan that'll last for a long time for all of us. And then finally, the number of units. We heard some numbers from the presenters, we bounce numbers around, we've talked about money here, but we really don't know. But I think as we progress through this and we start to create and build this, it'll be easier to identify a final number. But remember, the city's going to continue to grow. So is there a final number? Maybe not. But maybe there's a percentage number that we're all comfortable with, and we can get to that. And I think that's it, Mike.
So now to really the meat, and that is, I'll put it in black and white. We don't want to waste our time, and we don't want to waste city resources. So we are indeed looking for direction. I'm sorry, there's only 4 of the 7 here, but the 4 of you are indeed a majority, and can tell us, Mike, you have or excuse me, council committee, you have our support on these items, or no, we don't have take exception to anything you've presented today, or committee, you're not going to have my support on this or that. Frankly, we'd like to hear that, and we know not to pursue those things. We're here to work on your behalf, period. So we'd like to hear from you. If there's anything that you find offensive or otherwise, let us know. If there's something that you want us to really concentrate on, but I guess at this point, we're just looking for guidance if we're off base anywhere.
Mike, I'm going to lead that off real quick. I have talked about when I was campaigning also, but many, many years within the city about the need for data. And I think one of the things that we've all discovered here in this committee is the numbers don't lie. When you have stakeholders come through to us, and we live in this community, we go to restaurants, we go to the hospital, we hear this stuff, we read Nextdoor, we read Facebook. We know these things are vulnerabilities. So I think the quicker we get onto this, the better we are. It is going to take some action to kind of move this forward. I'm hoping that we can get that grant and get somebody full-time to help us out. And knowing that this committee will morph as we go along, the more education we get, the more facts that we collect. And I think as time has gone by, it's become clearer to all of us the next steps we need to take. I can't imagine anybody, even the missing members of the council, that would not support this. Again, we live in this community. But anyway, Lois and Ted, I hope we get your support. I'm going to put you on the hot seat now.
We don't have to do this. We can stay the way we are. The homeowners that live here can see a tremendous appreciation in home value. And the workforce can live in Chino and they can live in Prescott Valley. And then instead of being 47,000 at night and 100,000 during the day, we could be 47,000 at night and 120,000 during the day. We could still keep losing police people on fire because they find a better deal somewhere else because they're just here, and then we spend another $500,000 or plus to retrain people. You have a lot of financial numbers, and I just spouted off 3, but I'm sure there's more, and that's where I earlier talked about synergy with Simpo, and understanding what the impact is if we don't do this. Ms. Kennedy, I mentioned that what you had talked about, I'm sure was in the 2005 general plan. Everybody back then, in 2005, we have to give them credit as being visionary because they were saying that we needed affordable housing before we really needed affordable housing. Now we're at crisis stage and we still don't have affordable housing. I'm sorry, workforce housing. It's Pavlovian with me. So I think this is a good effort. I think it needs to be a little more global in your integration with other entities to come up with numbers that justify it. I have a problem with one proposal, and I think what I heard was the idea of putting like a casita on a current property. I can't imagine any HOA going for that, but if there's a way to make that work, I just see that as, I wouldn't open with that. I wouldn't open with a Stalin-esque building somewhere up in northern Prescott. I'd kind of start where you're not going to have an argument at all. That is, go into where we currently have housing and do fixer-uppers and make them starter houses for the people who move here. But good job.
As I said earlier, I'm definitely supportive of your effort and most of what you've presented today. Though the one that does scare me is the accessory dwelling unit. And it's not the brilliancy of that idea, but it's how we go about implementing it that scares me, or that we don't have controls over. So that's the only one I'm worried about. I wouldn't lead with that either until you have flushed that much further out. But I do think the majority of the community, you know, as Ted said, they see the roads, they see where people are coming from. There is concern in our downtown neighborhoods. You would love having more police, nurses, and fire living in downtown. So I do think that the community would go along, and you would have my support.
Yeah, well, I think everybody here knows that I'm in very committed and strong support for developing these options for our community. There are things that the city can do clearly. We can take a look at some of our land development codes and offer some more supportive code changes, and then also make sure that we have legitimate code enforcement. So as we mentioned before about some of the positives that have occurred in the Dexter community, once we kind of upgrade the appearance of those neighborhoods, and then developers decide to come in and develop some small apartment units, then we have to make sure that we enforce those codes and keep the neighborhoods visually appealing and be consistent about that. Sometimes before you decide to commit your capital, you want to make sure that you're going to have a long-term return on that capital. So the developers have to make sure that the city is going to do their job in the long run and be consistent, because they will get the return that they're expecting. Having more incentives for development within the city, I think we're doing a pretty good job with that. I think when we look at the overall number of multifamily development units that are in the process of being permitted and working, I also think that our water policy can be continued to be improved to make sure that we provide the water necessary so that the committed developments know they're going to have water for their programs and for their plans, and not worry about spending a lot of money planning on something and then finding out they're not going to be able to get the water they need to go forward. So we're seeing some of that disconnect happening right now. So that water policy monitoring and review committee kind of needs to address some of the improvements that could be made in that policy itself. Financing, I think, we'll look to continue to try to find funding sources, grant sources, and I think we need third-party financing incentives to be able to come from the private sector as well. I would like to see the committee take a look at some other solutions that may be implemented or being proposed in other parts of the state. I know that there are some discussions that happened at the last annual meeting of the Arizona League that seemed to be quite interesting, but I don't know if the committee's had a chance to even entertain those things. So I think there's a series of things that can be done here, and we can move forward with this. a regional workforce housing strategic plan, I think, is a great idea, because I think it's more implementatable, if that's a word, than it isn't.
I understood it.
Okay, you're excused. I just coined it. Than relying on the general plan. I've just seen so many times over the years that if a program aligns itself with a general plan, then we'll hear comments like, well, this is aligned with the general plan, and that was overwhelmingly approved by the voters. And then if it doesn't align itself, then you hear this, well, the general plan's just a guideline. So I think having more of a strategic housing plan is something that could be a little more implementatable. So I think there's a lot of things that can be done, and I think you're right, having some kind of a dedicated city employee to manage over the course of the years as these short-term plans are implemented, and then moving more towards a long-term plan, then we'll finally get to a point where we may have solved a lot of the concerns here in the community. So I think you can rely on me to continue to advocate for it and support it. And thank you for all of your efforts so far. And I know it's a big ask, and it's a long-term commitment. But if we can start showing results in different areas, I think Lois, your idea about having some visual, not this, but this type of ability to show that to communities. Yeah, not this, but that. Yeah. Because I thought maybe we could have some model homes that were kind of some of the things that John has worked on, to be able to have community members be able to see a visual example of a nice, high-quality manufactured home. But it's not like we can just set one aside and have the community walk through it all the time like a model home. So we may have to go with some type of a visual example of it. So I
Mike?
think that's where I stand, and thank you, Mike. Yeah, Randy?
Thank you. Thank you for all of your comments very much. Randy.
Sorry, I want to rewind just a little bit on the ADU deal. When we talked about it, what we were looking for is a quicker solution, to be able to have housing for the next firefighter or police officer recruitment that are coming in. They don't have any place to live. We're not the house police, so we're not going to be able to say, well, you can't rent it to your brother-in-law if you guys allow this. But we were hoping a percentage of those unused ADU units could be made available to our nurses and our firemen and our policemen and teachers. So that was kind of the idea behind it. I remember statewide they can do VRBO or Airbnb with it right now. So I think maybe it's less impact if it's full-time and not used weekends, every weekend in and out. So that was our thought. That was our idea behind it. Is it's going to take a while to get workforce housing built, planned, designed, and built. This is something that could happen if they exist pretty fast. So if that helps at all.
Randy, I want to build on that real quick too.
Sure.
Because I'm going to get 1,000 emails now. I don't see a path that an ADU structure would ever be allowed in an HOA, especially the high density, zero lot line. First of all, there's no physical room for them. So I don't see that happening. But we don't have, in Prescott, especially in the downtown area, we have lots that could potentially fit those in there. They would still fit with the setbacks. It would fit with the zoning. That's not a problem. In the 1 acre parcels that have formed, with their CC&Rs, they don't allow it. Those people would have to be on a case-by-case basis where they can come in and, if they have an acre, let's say, they can come in and apply for that, but then everything in the building code is going to have to fall into them. They're going to have to meet the setbacks and that kind of thing. But I don't see a path forward in the HOAs just physically are not going to be able to fit those.
Yeah. Just to be clear, I was not worried about the HOAs. I live in one. I know the rules. I mean, we can't even have detached garages. So, you know, that's the reality when you go into an HOA. My worry was turning the downtown into a giant hotel room. And so if you build it, somebody may figure out, let's keep turning these into short-term rentals. And so I don't want to explode short-term rentals. I want long-term rentals. And I don't know how legally we can protect that. That's my concern, not the concept.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
and-
think we can for very long.
Yeah,
But
and
again,
I-
if they take money, that's different.
Yeah, and our discussion has been that it's like I mentioned before, it's a slippery slope. So that tool is going to take a lot of work into the detail. We're going to have to get into the weeds on that one before we went further. Yes, Chelsea.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Hi, Chelsea Walton, Community Development Director. Just two quick things. Number one, absolutely, the HOA question, the city cannot be more restrictive than the HOAs. They have their own contracts with all of the owners. So if they can't build it there, that's between them and the HOA. But what our code says right now is that you cannot, even if you have an existing one, you are not allowed to rent it out as a long-term rental. And then the state comes in and preempts us and says, but you can do short-term rentals. So the idea behind this code change initially, the thought was simple. Well, if short-term rentals are already allowed and we can't do anything about that, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot by saying long-term rentals flat out aren't allowed. So let's just start with baby steps saying, okay, let's allow long-term rentals. We've already had a few members in the community approach us and say, I would love to do a long-term rental. Granted, they weren't specific to say for workforce, but the fact that they want to put a unit in the supply chain for long-term is great. And unfortunately, we had to say, no, our code doesn't allow that. So the initial thought behind this, again, was just very simple. We already have the impacts of the short-term rentals and all that is implied by those. Let's go ahead and just open it up for those community members that want to rent out to the traveling nurse, that want to rent out to the recruited police officer or fire cadet or those folks going through the program. So that was just the initial thought behind the ADU. But to Mike's point, it is a slippery slope. There's a lot of research to be done, but I think we can get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Okay, anything further? No, thank you very much for the guidance. I think we now have our marching orders on. We can start working. We'll get into the weeds on some of these items, and come back to council with more concrete and specific recommendations for you guys to look at, review, analyze, and eventually vote on.
That was the previous draft.
Okay. If that's it, I think we're adjourned. Thank you all very, very much.
Next.